Okay. And we have a couple of people, so I'm going to let them in. And then as more people come in, I will just keep letting people in. And I will ask you, I'll probably ask you what, you're into holistic health all over the place. How did you end up pursuing that? Because I actually find it kind of interesting because we're both in Calgary, and Calgary doesn't really have like, it's not the holistic health hub of the world or anything like that. And yet you're really, I know from being a client of yours and getting to know you that you're really passionate about holistic health, a whole person. So
Absolutely.
what brought you into that area of interest, Erin?
Oh, well, it started, I used to be in like social care work. So I actually did, like I worked in group homes, I worked as a case manager, I worked in education, all kinds of different roles. But I was working with people with disabilities. And what I was finding was that a lot of them weren't the congenital disabilities that I had been expecting. They were actually all kinds of sort of like medical things that were happening. So someone would have sort of one medical thing happen, they'd get medication, for example, that would maybe cascade into some other things. Then the symptoms of that would be managed with other medication. And like we would sort of end up in this snowball effect that we didn't know, like no one would sort of know what way was up anymore. And I started seeing an acupuncturist during that time because I had benefits. So I was excited. And it was just sort of, yeah, the most profound kind of healing that I'd ever experienced in all my travels and all the different things I've tried. It was just the most profound thing that I had tried. So I've been a doctor of acupuncture now for about 8 years. And what's been really beautiful is just like seeing over the course of that, like just how when we approach our health holistically, it just like changes the game completely, right? So instead of just chasing symptoms or instead of just sort of being like, um, let's just get rid of symptoms, when we look at like, what do we want to feel like? What do we want the goal to be? What does vibrancy look like? What does pleasure look like? What does doing this in an enjoyable way look like? Like it just becomes a completely different ballgame. And it's a way more fun. It's way more effective. And so, yeah, I just kept kind of following the trail of that. And yeah, no going back now because it was
All the
just
studies
yeah,
too, right? Like, because
yeah.
Erin is my acupuncturist, and she's helped me a lot when I was having a cycle to make the cycle come a little bit easier and be a little bit lighter and a lot less pain and discomfort. And I could kind of time it so I could come in and see her and then, have the treatment and like literally wear a pad because my flow would start.
That's awesome.
It was awesome. But now I'm on this medicated menopause journey where I don't know if I was wondering if it's actually what that would be called, but I'm on a pill to stop menstruation, which I'm kind of interpreting as putting me into a menopausal state. And so I'm not coming in at the same kind of regular intervals because I don't have any regular anything going on. I'm more going based on how I feel. And Erin is just really insightful, and I love the holistic way of looking at our health. And she's one of the first practitioners that really asked me about like sex and relationships and all of those things that are more maybe considered private or off the books. And she's a doula and she does yoga, and she's got an online offering that we'll definitely share with you guys at the end. So and she's just great to talk to about anything that you're going on. She always says, "Do you want me to leave you alone?" Because acupuncture, they usually place the needles and then they leave you. I'm like, "No, I want you to stay. I want chit chat and pick your brain and see what ideas come up." And um, so it's been really great. And Erin, you look so young. I'm surprised you've been an acupuncturist for 8 years because I do remember meeting you, and I was referred to you from someone else that I trust who said, no, she's good and she knows what she's doing and she'll help you. But I've had, I think, 3 or 4 other acupuncturists, and none of them could help me with my symptoms. And I don't know if that's because when I came to them, I was just presenting with symptoms, or when I came to you, I actually said, I'm in perimenopause. I
Right.
need help. I have an angry liver. Do you remember that?
Totally.
Who is this girl? She has, but it made me easier to treat, I think. Did that make it easier for me to be treated with
I
acupuncture?
think anytime like people are connected to their body, I'm really excited to hear that information. Like I think like the mark of being a good practitioner is that you trust the people's wisdom about their own body is the most important aspect. So yeah, I definitely find that part really useful for sure.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
appreciate like you'll always ask me if there's placement with the needles, if I'm comfortable or uncomfortable. So what happens if someone is really afraid of needles? You can still treat them though, right?
Absolutely. Actually, I have a fair amount of people in my practice that are afraid of needles because I am more of a gentle person. So I get a lot of like highly sensitive people, or I get people who are have like actual outright fear of needles, and that kind of thing. And it just there's always an ability to go at the pace that a certain person wants to go at, right? So I think that that's part of a holistic approach, is that we actually approach each moment, each person, each time in a completely unique way. Um, and I think like even for ourselves, right? Like I think giving ourselves that courtesy is beautiful, and it actually lends itself to much more effective. I think there's like such a myth that like the harder we push, and the no pain no gain and like all of that kind of stuff, and it's just like such a myth for most people. I think there's maybe like a small part of the population that responds really well to that kind of stimuli, but in my experience it's not the majority by any stretch. So yeah, I think that going at our own pace is like crucial. So if someone's afraid of needles, it doesn't actually change anything. We're still just going to go at the pace that works for that particular person on that particular moment. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I like your placement. I've had other acupuncturists get me right in the nerve, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
does not feel good. But that's never happened with you, and I'm not sure if you're just because you have that gentle nature, or you're just feels like you're working on a very intuitive level with me,
Absolutely. Yeah.
what I can
Absolutely.
tolerate and what I can't, like,
Yeah.
and maybe
Absolutely.
it's not massage, but like how deep you go on,
Yeah. 100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
because if I'm
Yeah.
more fragile, it does feel like you're a little bit sneaking up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that that's important, right? Like whether we're dealing with something with ourselves or with someone else, that
Mhm.
we're going, yeah, in a way that is more intuitive and gentle, for sure.
And what about, does traditional Chinese medicine have like a menopause protocol or an idea of how to
Mhm.
approach menopause, or is this something that you're kind of
Absolutely.
going based on, the charts and the input that we give when we first sign up to see you?
So it's always going to be both. So absolutely, of course, Chinese medicine has like thousands of years of exploration of what menopause and perimenopause look like, and how to support that in a general sense. But every single person is going to be very unique, and I think that's one of the things I love the most about the way that Chinese medicine approaches the body and approaches health, is that it isn't a protocol based thing. Like it isn't sort of like, oh, if someone has menopause, then you do XYZ for them and that's it.
Mm.
You won't see that with anything. Like even sometimes I'll get questions from people sort of being like, oh, like what points do you use for a headache? And it's just like that doesn't exist actually. It's not the sense that like these are for headaches. It's that we figure out what the headache is being caused by, and then we treat the person, not the illness. And so there is definitely a way that Chinese medicine sees menopause that I think, like for all of us that are here today and live or watching the recording, is actually incredibly useful, because it's I think maybe a slightly different way than some of us would have grown up. I mean, some of us here might have grown up with that context as well. But so the idea is that the yin of the body starts to diminish a little as we get older, and that's a healthy thing. That's not a problematic thing. That's not something to avoid. That's an absolutely natural thing to do. And for people in female bodies, there is this idea of a 7-year cycle. So every 7 years, we might expect to see slight variations, right? Like for many people, it'll be around 14 that menstruation starts. At 42, you'd be on your 6th cycle, and that's often when perimenopause starts to at least dance in a little bit. And then 49 would be the 7th cycle, and that's when menopause often has a tendency to start to dance in as well, right? So it's the beautiful sense of the cycles of the body. Um, One of the things I love about traditional Chinese medicine as well is that they really see menstruation as an important indicator of health. So as soon as someone starts menstruating, there could be a focus on how to make sure that that's optimal and healthy in a beautiful way. Which I don't know about all of you here, but that was definitely not what I found was the case growing up. Like it was like, oh, I have menstruation now. I hide this from everyone. It's like, and like I had parents that were amazing, but the outside world was not one that like I felt that I could even share that with. So but the idea is that if we support menstruation through the entirety of that cycle, then we actually set ourselves up for menopause in a way that's very different than I think we're seeing now. And the idea is that actually symptoms are not acceptable. Like I think that in a lot of systems of medicine, we're seeing this idea that like menopause is just symptom based, and you're just going to have symptoms, and that's
Mhm.
the way it is. Like you won the draw and got born into a female body. Like but it's not in traditional Chinese medicine, that isn't the case. The idea is that we would be providing ourselves and being provided by others with nourishment and balance and the things we need to have an optimal cycle no matter where we are. But as we get older, yin has a tendency to deplete. And so what we can, this is always something that I think is actually kind of beautiful to feel in the body itself. So if any of you want to right now, or like I say, if someone's watching the recording and they want to do it, I really invite you to just like feel into the body for a second. And just, if possible, if it feels accessible today, to just kind of feel a sense of stillness for a moment. You can even just kind of use the breath in the way that you would in a yogic sense, but just like bringing a little stillness to the physical body. And yin is this very physical form that you have. So it is like that weight of the body that you feel. If you sort of feel into like the muscles, the skin, the sinews, like that's the yin of your body. It's the parts of the body that you can actually touch. It's what would show up on an MRI. It's the sense that like if we were to just stay here in rest and stillness, that's yin. And we can imagine too that if we were to stay here for, say, half an hour in stillness, a lot of us would probably start to cool off a little bit, or become a little chilled even. And yin is this nature. It's sort of the nighttime coolness, physical structure. It's all of these kinds of things. It's the blood, the lymph. This is all yin. And now it's balance, and it's not its opposite necessarily. It's its opposite. It's what creates. It's what dances in the circle with it would be yang. A lot of people pronounce this yang, which is not strictly correct, but is totally fine. So yang is the opposite. So if we want to bring that to the body now, I invite you to bring in some movement. So if we bring in some movement, that my ability to lift my arm, that's yang. It's this function. So it's not the arm itself, it's my ability to move it. And again, if we were to think about, okay, if I was to, get some good movement here for half an hour, I'm going to probably warm up, right? It's that functionality and warmth and movement. That would be yang. So yang is not something that's going to show up on an MRI, right? It's not going to show up in an X-ray. It's not going to show up. We can't feel it. We can't touch it. We can't experience it with our eyes. It is much more so energy. So, and I think like sometimes people start to like throw that around in a really esoteric way, right? This idea like, and it can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also literally just the energy that our cells use to function. Like it's totally functionality. And this would be a case too, where someone is experiencing a symptom, for example, and they go to like every practitioner they can think of, and they do multiple imaging and multiple tests, and everyone's like, no, there's nothing wrong. Like, yeah, well, I know there's something wrong because it's not functioning properly, right? And so that would be more of a yang issue. And one of the things I love about modalities like traditional Chinese medicine is that if you see a problem or you see something, then you know how to work with it. But if you can't see it, it's very, very hard to do that. So now that we kind of have this sense in our body of the yin being this like stillness, coolness, physical structure, and the yang that is the warmth and the movement and functionality, what happens as we go through perimenopause and into menopause is that the yin starts to come down in a very normal and natural way. But what that means is now we have yang looks a little bit higher, right? The balance here has changed a little bit. And so that's, if this balance goes too fast, doesn't have what it needs to be supported, that's when we start to look at things like hot flashes, anxiety, insomnia, things like that, right? You get this sort of overfunctionality or heat or that kind of thing, right? Like when the body's supposed to be in rest, it's awake. So you have this insomnia, right? When one could be grounded and calm, one is feeling anxiety and the body feels very revved up and hot. And even anxiety has a tendency even to feel like it's going up like heat does, right? Like it has this very like feeling to it. So we see that imbalance in there. And that yin coming down can also cause symptoms like hair loss, for example, because it is hair is an extension of that, right? So you can sort of see that most of the symptoms that one would normally expect to see when things are out of balance is because of that balance between the two. And then, like you were saying, that angry liver as well, that is the other dynamic that has a tendency to play here. Oh yeah, we'll totally get to your question, Allison. Bear with us here. Okay, I'm going to come back to that question in just one second. but the liver qi stagnation is what it's called. And I want to be really clear that this doesn't mean there's actually necessarily something wrong with the liver organically. This is a different framing of looking at things. And so the liver can be, is really responsible for like the free movement of qi in the body. So that this idea that everything is moving, energy is moving, functionality is moving around. And when that stops, then we might start to see things like moodiness, anger, rage, changes in the cycle, right? So the cycle is meant to sort of shift and move gently throughout the cycle. And if it can't do that, then we'll start to see menstrual differences and changes as well. So, and I think what I want to emphasize the most out of all of this is that we can look at this from a symptom-based way, which I think is what we have a tendency to do, and is constantly sort of thinking about symptoms and how terrible it is. And like, even when you look at the stuff around perimenopause and menopause, like the descriptions make me so insane, because it's always just like, your ovaries are depleting and everything is just going barren and dying and everything is depleted. And like, it's just like this very like, estrogen is gone and that has so much functionality and now you'll have no serotonin. Like it's just like this incredible cascade of things that are being described. But nature doesn't do anything for no reason, right? So there is a superpower and a beauty in all phases. And so for me, it's really about like, how do we look at like, what could this look like in an optimal sense? What could this look like as a balanced, vibrant? Like, what are the things that come out of this that are actually really, really beautiful? And I don't see those conversations happening. So one
We
of the examples, yeah, totally, we are,
I
yeah.
am having them.
Yeah,
I
totally,
yeah,
totally.
did you hear the interview with on CBC when I said, you know, what's missing is hope?
Absolutely,
And Martin was
absolutely.
watching the show and he was like, you should have seen that his eyes, like just as soon as I said hope.
Yeah,
Right. Because that's what I found missing. I was like, okay, what can
absolutely.
I say on CBC that's relevant? Because there are resources online that you can find that are Canadian based. But like you said, they're just information. It's this and it's this and
Mhm.
it's this and it's this. But
Yeah,
there's no like, what do you do with that? What's the next
absolutely,
step? Where do I go from
absolutely.
there? Where is the hope?
Yeah,
No role for the wise woman. There's no, you know,
absolutely,
just going to turn into Mrs. Claus. That was a joke I made yesterday. That we don't all want to be Mrs. Claus, lovely as she is. Um,
absolutely.
and I'm interested in this question too, because the traditional Chinese medicine, as well as the naturopathic ones. Now, my personal take on that would be when you're doing everything that everybody's telling you to do, you're just doing a little bit of everything. You haven't really committed to anything, and you might get really mixed results, or something might
Mhm.
start working and you have no idea what it is.
Mhm.
So if I see Zarko for osteopath and then I see you, I don't feel that you guys are going to be in each other's toes or stepping, you know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
you guys
Yeah.
are very complementary. Osteopath is not going to get in the way of the acupuncture or vice versa. But
Mhm.
if I was walking out with an armful of naturopathic supplements and then I went to a traditional Chinese medicine doctor who's giving me two or three different things to try that are more
Mhm.
traditionally herbal based,
Mhm.
how would I know it's working?
Mhm. Absolutely. And also, yeah, Allison's question is amazing. So this is my own personal philosophy. So I just want to preface it with that. My philosophy is always that we do the simplest thing first. So the gentlest thing, the simplest thing, and we start from there and we go from there. And so I think I see a lot of people who are on like just huge lists of things. And I think besides the fact that you don't even know what is working, you also, the overwhelm of taking that many things can also like actually undermine the efficacy of any of it, right? If you are so overwhelmed with number of appointments, number of herbs, the cost of all of that, that's not useful. That stress is going to play into the liver qi stagnation we were just talking about, for example, and can make symptoms worse, actually. So my suggestion is always to pare down to as little as possible and go from there. And I think that like if at any time we're working with someone and we don't feel like we're getting any efficacy from what they're prescribing, then that's an important conversation to have, right? Like it's an important conversation to let them know like this isn't working. And so we need to adjust and we need to change. And like I say, my personal philosophy is I never prescribe more than one herbal formula at a time.
Yeah.
Like like I
Yeah.
have maybe in the entirety of my practice like prescribed two at a time for a very specific reason, and usually they take one during like one part of the cycle and they take another one like during another part of the cycle. It's not like every day they're taking both. um And so I think like one thing is that you don't want to be taking supplements and herbs and medications, especially from multiple practitioners without letting everybody know what you're taking,
Mhm.
because that's problematic. The other thing is there aren't really great studies on most herbs and supplements and their interaction with most medications. We don't have great data there for the most part in terms of safety. And so I really recommend that if anyone's on any kind of pharmaceutical, that they're very, very, very slow and careful about adding anything else to that, and having really good conversations with their doctor and their pharmacist. The pharmacists are actually sometimes the best for that.
Pharmacist's best, you guys.
Yeah,
Talk to your
yeah,
pharmacist. They know you have a
yeah,
vagina and they're okay with hearing about it. That's,
absolutely.
that's something I learned
Um,
really recently because
yeah,
my pharmacist will be like, vag cream, like yelling when he sees me.
hilarious.
He's really funny. Okay,
That's hilarious.
I'm gonna add this into the chat that just says Aaron and I were talking about how people may want to participate. If you would like to just ask a question in the chat, you can go ahead
Mhm.
and do that. But if you feel comfortable and you'd like to unmute and have your camera on, you can feel free to do that and pop in and ask your question as well. And it'll just make you more comfortable. If you're comfortable doing that, you just do whatever you're most comfortable with. That's what we want for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with the recording, I know not everyone wants to pop on and actually use their voice, but I really love like actually having a conversation with you. So yeah, if that feels good, please feel free to just like at any time, just unmute and like say, and please join the conversation. Yeah.
It's fine. Um,
Yeah.
I think that the one thing that I say to people when they ask me about it, I'll say there's a lot of like things that I've tried that really help with like adaptogens. I'm working with one particular adaptogen that I think has helped me a lot. But I'm not on any heart medicine. I'm not on any blood thinners. I'm not on any cholesterol pills. I'm not on anything that would be potentially like you have to let that work. You can't do anything that might interfere with that stuff working.
Absolutely. Mhm,
And it's not going to interfere with, like I said, I'm on a pill that stopped my cycle.
mhm,
It's not going to interfere with that. So I know that I can safely try that. And like the supplements that I take are all like magnesium. I know exactly what it is, right? I don't do a lot of
mhm,
blends or experimenting, but it was when I was really, really sick and I was doing that, going to every different practitioner and trying everything. It was actually a massage therapist who said to me, you know what? You'll have no idea if any of this works because you're doing it all at once.
mhm,
And isn't that maybe part of what could have contributed to you having this chronic inflammation, doing everything all at once
mhm.
as a chronic work?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I had never really
Yeah.
thought of it that way, but it
Yeah.
kind of made me reevaluate what I was doing and what I was spending my money on.
And I think too, like especially when we don't feel well, like we want to feel better soon, right? Of course we do, especially when the symptoms are bad. But what happens is I find that people get really caught in these cycles of just like quickly finding the next person and the next batch of supplements and the next like, and it's sort of this constant chase outwards. And my question is always just like, how do we bring it back to ourselves and our own knowing and our own knowledge, right? Like I think, especially because perimenopause, for example, like often things shift and change, and what worked before doesn't work anymore. And so I think sometimes we lose a sense of like trying to look after ourselves and listening to our own voice. And
Mhm.
my concern and my fear is if someone is constantly trying to chase the new practitioner, the new supplement, the new, superfood or whatever else, like is that yeah that inquiry inward is not happening as much, right? We're not sitting with what do I know to be true, what do I feel actually works for me. um you know we're always going to be the expert, and I always trust people's instincts over anything else,
Mhm.
around what they need. And like I've even had people come in, like this happens literally to all the time to me, that people who have never studied Chinese medicine in ever anyway, they've never ever looked at it, and they come in and they tell me what's happening for them, and then we have a conversation about like what they want to do, like what are they craving, what do they desire to do, what feels best for them to do, and then they will just list for me exactly what traditional Chinese medicine would say they should do. And it's just like it's shocking actually, but we've been so taught that that's wrong, right? Like we've been taught that like people will be like, oh, I'm really craving chips all the time, and it'll be like, yeah, actually salt right now makes perfect sense for you, or like that chewing motion is actually like a really good thing, or the rootedness of potatoes, a fantastic one for you. Or someone might be like, I don't like salads right now. It's like, yeah, your digestion is tanked, you actually shouldn't be eating salads. That's 100% right. Or like people say, I just want to rest, like I have this boot camp and I haven't gone like 3 times this month because I'm so tired. I'm just like, yeah, because everything you're telling me is indicating that you actually should 100% be resting and shouldn't do boot camp again for like 6 months. So the natural tendencies that we want, even when they go against what we've always been taught is right, is amazing how often the body actually knows. And like the number of times I've like told people to go have burgers and fries is like hilarious. Like you're just like, actually that smoothie you're having every morning might be doing way more harm than you think, especially if you don't enjoy it, especially if it gives you a stomach ache, especially if you spent more money on it than you wanted to. It's like that it can be like a really problematic thing actually, but we're so ingrained for like the no pain, no gain. And like, if it's not expensive and special, then it's probably not what heals us. Right. And it's remarkable how much gentleness, kindness, following our own cravings and desires and intuition, like actually is way more healing. It's
Yeah.
just, it's not as sexy. It doesn't sell.
No.
Right. It doesn't sell products. And so it doesn't get the same airtime that some of these other things
I
do.
wanted to just tell you
But,
about this one client I had, and she was definitely overloaded. She said she would walk out of her naturopathic doctor appointment with armfuls of, new things to try every time.
yeah.
And some of those products are $60, $100, per container,
Mhm.
right? And so she's telling me, I think maybe, it's all too much, right? She's having liver pain,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
discomfort in that quadrant, that upper
Mhm.
right-hand quadrant, which tells me, you can have just a little bit of inflammation and it's quite painful, right? Um, so maybe you are taking too much. And she said, yeah, I'm in the kitchen and I'm going to take this pill that she's given me for this, whatever it is. And she goes to take it and spits it out. And then
Mhm.
needs me to tell her that that's cool, man. Don't take that. Like your body
Yeah.
just told you. I had that happen once with a pill where I was on it for a long time and it was working great and it was through this perimenopause transition. And then one day I looked at it and I was like, I don't want to take it. And I picked up the packet and the pill fell on the floor.
Mhm.
And I went, okay. And I personally don't think it's a great idea to just stop taking stuff, especially prescriptions. So I went back to my doctor and I said, I don't want to take that anymore. What else could is it like, give me other options. I want something that's a little bit milder. And so we did a switch and then it was fine again. But we are sort of, I think, conditioned and trained to excuse ourselves and be like, oh, well, I'm just in a bad mood, or I'm just feeling overwhelmed, or that was just an accident. It's like, I mean,
Mhm.
accidents do happen, and I'm kind of accident prone myself. But when I do have an accident, I ask myself, right? Like, did I really not like that container because I just broke it? Like,
Mhm.
maybe I didn't, right? Like one time I got a gift
Absolutely.
that was definitely a regift, and, pretty much right away, boom, all over the floor, and I looked at it and I was like, I didn't want that, and
Mhm.
is it destructive of me to break it? Well, at this point in my life, I don't really care, I'm just gonna take that as good information
Mhm.
and clean it up, no harm done, who cares? It doesn't really matter, but I'm listening a lot more to the instincts about, who I wanna work with and what kind of things will work for me, and, here's one thing that's interesting too. I had one who quit working with me because my treatment or my sessions didn't work for her, but she wanted to lose weight, but she wasn't doing any of the things that I kept talking to her about moderation and, like not having restrictive dieting, and she wouldn't stop with this kind of a little bit like, jumping on the treadmill kind of first thing in the morning with nothing in her stomach and just going like a mad woman, even though she wasn't loving it, right? It wasn't bringing her pleasure. It wasn't really
Mhm.
enjoyable. And then she was like, "Okay, well, it didn't work for me." And she also went off all of her prescriptions without talking to me or her doctor, and she was on some pretty powerful depressants. So don't do that.
Mhm.
Don't go off your antidepressants without talking to your doctor, because she did have to go back onto something. And in the meantime, now she's eating only meat. So she's gone just even more
Mhm.
extreme. So like, you know, yeah, I don't even
Absolutely.
I don't even know, but it makes you wonder, like, that's part of that mentality you're talking about, isn't it? Like, kinda like all or nothing and no pain, no gain,
Mhm.
and you gotta try
Mhm.
harder, and you gotta work more, and probably if she relaxed a little bit, maybe she wouldn't have the weight just magically, drop off. But when I was
Mhm.
trying to suggest to her maybe starting the day with some really gentle yoga practice that we were working on, she just wouldn't do it on her own.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, we've been taught for so many decades now, not only that our worth is completely tied to that, but that like, yeah, if we don't struggle, then it won't, nothing will change, right? If we don't try really hard. And like, I think we don't only not listen to our, like when you're saying like, did I just drop that as an accident? I think even further along, we're like, oh, I just did it because I don't have discipline. Or like it becomes this inblown shame, right? Like, so it's not just like, oh, maybe I don't want that. It's like, oh, I don't want it because I'm lazy, undisciplined. I like, like it becomes like that. And Erica, I totally agree with your comment in the chat. Like it really is about when do we really have time to tune into
Mhm.
ourselves, right? And when are we shown how to do that? I think you're so right. When do we learn that practice, right? And some people will have certain practices or modalities in their life that have helped them cultivate that. But even like in a yoga class, for example, when we're like, okay, tune into your body. How does your body feel? And it's like, yeah, okay, but how? Like if we're never talking or like we're not been taught how to do that, or even we might do that and it might hurt, right? Like, or you might feel so frenetic or so anxious that that isn't an option, right? Like when we feel those ways, like I've had times where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to quiet myself and tune into my body, and it feels like I'm vibrating so much it hurts because I'm so revved up in the nervous system, And so I think that you're absolutely right, Erica. Like, what does it look like to learn practices to do that, and what does it look like to build that time in, and is that even possible for sometimes, right? Like, so um there's a lot of really like gentle factors here, and I think like even being gentle with ourselves in terms of taking the time to listen to ourselves, right? Because then sometimes we flip the other way, right? And we're like, oh, I'm so undisciplined, I didn't take time to listen to myself, I didn't do my practices today to like listen to my body, right? Like, and it becomes this whole other thing, and that it just, so that I think like it's just, how do we always come back to gentleness and kindness for ourselves?
Mm.
And that's why I think I like working the most with pleasure, because I think when we get the most lost, when we're not sure what to do, sometimes pleasure can be an anchor point. So it's like, okay, I don't know what I need right now. And it's like, okay, well, what would be comforting? What
Mhm.
would feel soothing? What would feel nice? And that could be as simple as a walk outside to like touch a tree. That could be having a bath. That could be putting on my favorite show. Like it doesn't have to look a certain way. It's just like, what would feel pleasurable to me? And then we can start to build that practice of listening to ourselves. But I think the fear is that we would just never get off the couch, right? The fear is that if we ever did that, we would just never stop watching TV and eating, I don't know, bonbons or something. Like there's such a funny image in our in like culturally in the whole, I think it's almost worldwide at this point.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the case. Like when we rest, we give ourselves the space for like the authentic desires to come through. And I've seen this in my own life, and I've seen this over and over and over with patients who've allowed themselves that space to rest, who've put down the things that they knew weren't feeling good. And yeah, it's scary at first because things kind of dissolve at first, often, right? Like we have a period of time that can be, you know, where we feel like, oh my gosh, I might not get off the couch. But when we trust rest, like it's beautiful to see that like authentic desires come back, and people start to feel a really strong sense of like what might actually feel really good, and what might be really nourishing, and what might be really healing.
Yeah.
And and that's the other, like that's one of the things about the superpowers that I think like when you learn the different superpowers of each part of the menstrual cycle, for example, like your life shifts unimaginably, because now you're using what feels right in each part of your cycle, and you like you're just, it just becomes, you become so much more effective without trying as hard. And I think that like perimenopause and menopause are that way as well. Like when we lean into what's natural, the tendency here, there are beautiful benefits to that.
Mhm.
And even like the liver chi stagnation, like we often are like, oh, people in perimenopause and menopause, they're so moody, they're just so emotional. There's all this anger and rage. And I'm just like, I'm angry all the time. And it's like, okay, but should you be angry all the time? Like maybe this is a really authentic symptom and it's not a symptom at all. Maybe this is really authentic rage that is actually a beautiful
I
thing.
see. Like, 'cause when
And right.
I'm talking to women about it, and it's like, okay, so when that came up, what was going on? And almost always it's my family was ignoring me. I told them what I needed. I thought I had set a very clear boundary, and no one is listening to me. I'm suffering and I need the help. I've already done 20 years of this. It's my turn. I want to be alone. And when I look at all, I go, you know what? Those are all 100% natural. They're just indications that that boundary hasn't been set. Now, your boundary with a 6-year-old is going to look different than your boundary with someone who's 12. Someone who's 12 is perfectly capable of making dinner. They are. I made dinner. I took care of myself from the time I was 11. Was that perfect and good and balanced? No, it would have been great to have my mom still involved, but I learned and I survived and I'm resilient and it's fine. And it's actually one of the things I always said to my male children because I'd be like, why are you making me do all this stuff? I'm like, no, I'm not sending another guy out into the world who doesn't know how to do laundry and doesn't know how to make dinner and doesn't know how to clean up after himself because that's not helping you and your future family because I would like you to eventually give me grandchildren. And, that's one of the things and I was gonna say, I noticed that about you right away with the emphasis on pleasure in your sessions where you asked me about, "Is there anything else I could do to help you to become even, a little bit more comfortable here? Like another pillow, another blanket? Would you like the heating pad?" Those little options. And it doesn't take long, right? It's this little thing. So, one of the suggestions that, you can take from this is are you doing that for yourself? Like when women say, I'm just so tired and all I want to do is rest, I will ask them, when was the last time you had a really good rest and gave yourself an actual break?
Mhm.
Because one day I made dinner for myself because the kids had grown up and just took it to my bedroom and sat there and ate my dinner by myself in peace in my room. And my husband came upstairs, tick, 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 hey, that's not like you. What's going on? And I said, I'm just so sick of it. Like, I'm so tired of catering to everyone else around me, and I just want to cater to myself. I felt like eating this. As far as I'm concerned, you're perfectly capable of eating what you want to eat. Go ahead and make it for yourself. And he, luckily enough for me, was like, okay. And then I started describing it more like I'm kind of a dude now. I'm an honorary dude. I might be on the couch just, zoning out for a while because that's what I feel like doing. And if you take my spot, I'm going to give you a hard time about it. And I'm going to steal it back as soon as you get up. Now, this is not feminine kind of behavior of what we've been trained to do, but I feel like I've come into a much better place of balance with him because I'm holding up my boundaries about what it is I need and what it is I want, what I'll put up with, and what I won't put up with, which means sometimes, honestly, it is a mess in the kitchen and I'm not going to do it because I said I wasn't. I'll just walk around it. And it might be annoying, but it gets the point across and I'm not angry at him anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the, like what I love, like I said, teacher when I got to study traditional Chinese medicine, used to talk about how anger is the force that brings a seed up through the soil, right?
Mm,
Because in traditional Chinese medicine, all emotions have a good and a bad and a balance and a right timing, right? There's not this sense that like that's a bad emotion and that's a good emotion, and I only tend here and I pretend that none of these other bad ones exist. That just doesn't exist philosophically. And so what anger is the force that pushes the seed from being like, I'm not supposed to just stay here in the soil. I'm supposed to like push up and go to the sun. Right. So it's very much that feeling that like I'm not where I'm supposed to be, or something needs to change, or like anger is a really beautiful indication of something changing, right? And that's one of the superpowers that I'm noticing. I mean, superpower is kind of like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek word, like, but it just sort of gets the point across more quickly. But it's just like, what are the really beautiful advantages of a cycle, right? And when we lean into that, I think that's what health is like really leaning into what is naturally most fruitful at that time, right? And what I'm noticing is, yeah, like a lot of really authentic rage and anger that absolutely could is I think going to change the world, right? Like I think that it is an indication that things are not where they should be, or they aren't, things aren't working as well as they should. It can also be an indication that someone might not feel in alignment with their purpose, because liver and anger exist in wood element, and that part of the soul there is our purpose in life. Like what is it that we're sort of what is our purpose here, not our job, not really any of that, but like what is our soul purpose here, and do we feel like we're in that place, right? And then it's also this like what I'm noticing is that for a lot of people in perimenopause and menopause is this shedding of who I've been taught to be, who I'm supposed to be, the pressures I'm supposed to be, and there becomes this much more authentic expression. But we're not like I'm just not seeing enough conversations about how beautiful that is, to see all these people like really coming into their power, really coming into like who they are, just not worrying as much about what other people think of them,
Yeah.
like really shedding some of those and like just the beautiful expressions that are coming out of that. And even like in my practice too, I'm seeing like, yeah, a lot of people asking for what they want, taking the time to figure out what they want. And like you say, with the comfort measures, like it's actually one of my favorite things to do, because for a lot of people who haven't had a chance to think about themselves and to think about what they need and want, and like you were saying, Erica, like have the time to like check in with themselves, it actually becomes an opportunity to practice that. So it's just like, as they're on the treatment table, it's like, what do you need? It's like, what's your temperature? What are your, does anything feel like it's holding? Would you like an extra pillow somewhere? Do you feel like you need some weight here? Does this, is the music too loud? Do you hate the music? Do we need to change it? And
Yeah.
I literally get to watch people, like literally I'll see people who don't have a practice of this stop, close their eyes, and they'll sometimes take a couple of minutes to just like feel into like what they want and what they, and it like almost brings tears to my eyes. Like I get so happy to just
Mhm.
see people practicing that, right? And the
Yeah.
other thing we're not talking about is like too, like on the other side, what's that?
I was just gonna say about the heating pack. Like I can remember being in there and being just like so uncomfortable, and having problems with my body temperature. But you offered a heating pad on my lower back, and then do you remember we tried a couple different books to get the right amount of
Yeah.
pressure, because
Yeah.
compression is very soothing for the nervous system and it calms
So
you down.
soothing.
That's why we hug.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a magical experience to have that. So in a way, you're like mentoring, and in that container of that treatment space,
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating not only is it okay to listen to yourself, but it's okay to express it to someone else. And
Absolutely.
then, fart around until you get it right.
Totally.
And then
Totally.
the
When there's,
whole body just goes,
mm-hmm,
okay,
which is
that's
just
more relaxed.
beautiful. Yeah. And the other one that I'm really noticing, like beyond authentic expression too, and that I'm not seeing as much, is that oftentimes when people are like through menopause, that there is sometimes for people like this really gorgeous like sexual renaissance. Like just because there's so much focus on like, oh, there's vaginal dryness and
Mm,
libido goes down, and people, it's sort of this idea that like sexuality is over. But actually what I'm finding is that for a lot of people, once they get through menopause, especially when there can be some balance and health and vitality, is that there's like a huge sexual renaissance that's extremely exciting, really beautiful. And like, sometimes some people have been freed from like reproductive stressors that might have been there. And like oftentimes there is like a really beautiful time in people's lives, and so I think that it's exciting to lean into some of those things and like really think for ourselves, like what is happening here for us that is in service to us. Like what is it that it's not just this like decline that is being described as. I'm seeing in my practice like some really beautiful things that are born out of it. And so I think that, yeah, it's exciting that those conversations are being had more and more, thankfully.
yeah, and I had
Mm-hmm.
one of my friends, we were talking about all the stuff that we're going through. And it's not sexy, man. Like, my dad's dying. He's on
Mm-hmm.
palliative care. My mother-in-law just passed away. That's how we ended up in this house. My son is, going to be a father again. There's another baby on the way, and there's a lot of financial instability for him. And my other son is schizophrenic, and so there's mental health issues and concerns there. And my in-laws are not necessarily they don't understand what I'm doing on the planet, and so they find me, I stress them out, and so that can be stressful. I live across the street from my sister-in-law, but we don't really have much of a relationship because she doesn't trust me. And that's strange because you probably trusted me right after you met me, kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like, I'm used to making
Mm-hmm.
connections with people quite easily, let's put it that
Fair,
way.
fair.
And, none of these things really make you feel like, "Oh, yeah, hubba hubba. Let's get down." And
Absolutely.
I remember talking to you about that, as far as this emphasis on pleasure and just looking at it from that standpoint instead of like a pressure of, let's get it on and do it and make sure it's done right or whatever. But moving more into this idea of like, well, what feels good now? And not being worried about it. And then that promise that when you're through menopause, if you don't give up on having a sexual relationship, then you're in for the best sex of your life. So that's that's
Mm-hmm.
2 thumbs up from me, that's what I'm
Absolutely.
hoping for, and that does give me
Absolutely.
hope. That does give me something to look forward to, and that's one of the things that I really wanna emphasize in general, And I think that you and I have in common, although I don't know that we've ever really talked about the word hope. I feel like all of your practice and all of your sharings and all your Instagram, it's very hopeful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think hope is really important. Yeah. And I think that's why I love their like this focus on like gentle practices, but also practices that people can do themselves. So instead of like this, I have to indefinitely be on supplements from other experts, this idea that like it's actually in your hands. And I think that's one of the things I love about traditional Chinese medicine is that it is folk medicine. It's medicine that like people's grandmas do and moms do, and like that happens in the home, right? And so although acupuncture obviously itself isn't something that can like just necessarily be done at home, there are so many beautiful things that can be done. And when it comes to like perimenopause and menopause, like ones that I really want to highlight is like the biggest one is rest. Rest preserves our yin, right? So the more we overwork, overpush, overgive, which a lot of us are being asked to do all the time or have done for many, many, many years, that just depletes that yin quicker. So it's like we're taking the principal of our bank account instead of using what we're making at our job. We're using our savings kind of thing. And so that can make things a lot worse. So rest is one of the biggest ones. This doesn't have to look like taking a 6 month vacation in Hawaii. Like, I know that that isn't accessible to most of us. Rest can come in so many different forms and shapes and sizes, and it's really about what looks right for you. And this doesn't have to be Instagrammable either, right? Like, literally, like sometimes it's like laying on the floor listening to sad music, like it isn't about. And it is sometimes watching a show, right? Like sometimes we're so exhausted that is all that is available. And that's beautiful. Like if we discard the shame, then it can actually be a restful activity. And maybe it looks like just resting for 5 minutes in the car as we wait for our kids to come out of the school, right? But just allowing that rest, taking, like giving some permission so that rest can actually be nourishing can be really beautiful. Another one is that for people who are still experiencing any kind of menstrual cycle, I really recommend like getting to know it, leaning into it. So especially for people who are in even early perimenopause, right, where like they can feel things are kind of coming, but there's still that cycle there. Lean into finding balance in that cycle because that's going to set up things really beautifully for later down the road. And also, it's just exciting. Like it feels good. It feels like for so many of us, I think when we start to look at that, we realize that actually we're not undisciplined. Actually, we're not lazy. Actually, we're not like clumsy, even, right? That there are certain things that happen at certain parts of the cycle. And when we realize that that's very normal and natural, it's beautiful how that changes like our lives, right? If you're just like, oh, when I'm ovulating, I do great speaking to other people and having conversations. And my libido's a little higher and I feel a bit more sexy and I want to be out socializing with people and connecting. It's like, okay, so let's lean into that when it's happening. And when it stops and we move into luteal, it's not just like, oh, I'm not fun anymore. What's happening? Like, it's just like, oh, I'm in the luteal phase now. Okay, luteal phase. Let's get some administrative tasks done. Let's get some of those little nitpicky things off of the list. Let's like spend some time resting and preparing for menstruation. Let's start coming in. Like, then it gives us like this beautiful guidance that can be so life changing, truly, truly. And then the other thing is that we want to make sure that we're eating in a way that's supportive of digestion so that we're making more energy instead of depleting that yin. And one of the things I like about traditional Chinese medicine, it isn't about restrictive diets. It isn't about this idea that like just don't eat anything or like, you should only be having 100 calories a day or any of this nonsense. Like it's really about how do we eat in a way that supports digestion. And that can be things like eating cooked foods because they're already broken down a little bit. Warm foods are easier for our stomach to digest. Things like eating a little bit of warming spices. And if someone's getting a lot of hot flashes, then this might not be quite as much of a fit, but like supporting digestion with things like cinnamon and ginger that kind of help create some warmth there. Eating things that we crave, like trusting our cravings and like moderation, yes, whatever, moderation in all things, including moderation, but like, really like trusting our instincts, right? Like there can be beautiful reasons. And for me, one of the big things is like, if you're having a massive craving for something, gorgeous. Can you make it as nutrient dense as possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I was
then
gonna say
lean
that.
into it. Yeah.
I
So
was
like
gonna
for
say
me,
that
like,
with the chips, right? Like, because there's
yeah,
times where, like I just really want chips, and then I'll ask myself,
gorgeous.
like, is taking a potato and baking the potato and then just smothering it with salt gonna do it for me? And the answer is always yes, because what I really want is the potato, but I want it
Mm,
now, and the chip is
yeah,
just fast, quick, and dirty.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
when I ask those questions, is there a more nutrient dense option, right? If you want ice
Mm,
cream, I'm having these yogurt and frozen fruit bowls lately with some
mhm,
nuts in there, and maybe
mhm,
put some flax, get the extra fiber up and stuff like that. But while you're eating it, it's like, oh, it's almost like ice cream. And
mhm,
then the craving is satisfied, but I've actually given my body some good nutrient dense food, and I'm not
mhm,
hungry afterwards. And it doesn't spark me to just keep eating and eating and eating, right?
mhm.
That's
Absolutely.
experimenting and listening to your body and
Mhm.
being okay
And
with.
like have the actual thing too. Like I think 'cause sometimes it can make it worse. Like if it satisfies, great, and you feel good, then that's beautiful. But if not, it's like what I love to do is just like, okay, then I'm gonna go to like the health food store that I love because I'm a geek. And I'll get like the ice cream that's made with like local cream and like beautiful ingredients and like,
Mm,
fair trade cacao and all this nonsense. Because one, that indulges like that side of me that loves bougie food, and the other part of it that's just like this is a much more nourishing dense sort of thing. Or like if you're going to get chips, like can we get the chips that are like really beautiful avocado oil,
mm,
beautiful Himalayan salt, like, and maybe we can and maybe we can't. But I think what the thing is that we eat what we crave and then we discard any shame,
yeah.
right? So if you're like, no, what I want is a Lay's potato chip, so I'm gonna go get a Lay's potato chip and honor my body's desire. Like I literally have a friend who has headaches so bad, and she really craved Doritos one time when she had them, and so she ate some Doritos, and it literally made the headache go away. There was
Yeah.
something about the sodium that she needed in there. So like really trusting, even if it's a craving that isn't for something healthy. The thing is that I've seen ice creams that have nicer ingredients in them than some yogurts, right? So some of those descriptions are so funny anyway. But and the other thing is like exercise that you enjoy.
Yes.
Any exercise that you feel gives you pain, you hate doing it, you feel nauseous even thinking about going, it feels terrible, you feel terrible for 2 days later.
Mm,
These are not helpful things, regardless of what we've been told our entire lives. So things that you enjoy, like I had a teacher that used to always say, like if we drink alcohol when we're happy, it's very healthy for the liver, like it's soothing to the liver. If we drink alcohol when we're unhappy, that's when we see like some detrimental effects. And I would argue the same for exercise. When we move our bodies in ways that feel good, it's really therapeutic and healing. When we move our bodies in ways to punish them because that's how we've been told we should do it, it's really detrimental. And especially things like perimenopause and menopause, exercise becomes like the types of exercise actually become way more important. Like things that maybe weren't as detrimental in our 20s are going to have more of an effect. So it's really beautiful and crucial to stick to the things that feel delicious and you feel good after. And like maybe you don't like always like, I mean, people are sometimes are like, I don't feel like going. I don't understand. Like, pick something that you actually are excited to go for. And if you, especially if you feel better after, then that's amazing, right? So just like really sticking to like what feels pleasurable, what are the cravings, like coming back to that self expertise can be really, yeah, really, really beautiful.
yeah. I think I see that
Mhm.
with exercise where it's like, but I've always done the treadmill, right? That's just what I've always done. And so I'm just going to keep doing it. And the results are not there. So it's one of those things where it's like, well, if, yeah, you've always been doing it, but you're tuning out the whole time and not loving it anyway. Wouldn't it be better to go and try
Mhm.
a dance class or, like I love Zumba because you don't have to be a good
Yeah.
dancer to do Zumba, but it's totally fun and it gets your heart going. And that's really what your goal is to keep the body moving and keep everything functional. And I definitely notice at this point in my life that if I'm not moving much during the day, by the end of the day, I am achy
Mhm.
and I am sore.
Mhm.
And then when I go back through it's like, what did I do today? Well, I walked the dog, but I just did a really quick around the block kind of walk. I didn't actually go down to the park and really stretch my legs out or anything like that. And it's just the body kind of curving in on itself to sort of protect itself, I think. And I have to unfurl every day. So I have a floor
Mhm.
nap probably most days, and I'm rolling around on the floor trying to activate my spine and, doing some kind of yoga every day. And it makes a huge difference. And it's not really the kind of thing that's optional. Oh, here comes Kitty.
Mhm.
Oh, look, he just knew, he must have known we were running out of time. Okay. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with us in particular about perimenopause and menopause?
I would love to leave time for if there are any questions. Like, does anyone have any specific questions that they want to either pop in the chat or unmute themselves?
No, everybody's pretty
Okay,
quiet.
beautiful. One thing that I have like a few books that I think are really amazing when it
Mhm.
comes to like just like your, the cycle and that kind of stuff. And from one of them, so I'm going to list them, but one
Okay.
of the things that I thought was really, really beautiful was this sense that like I think a lot of times we think of menopause as like the ending. And so we think that like things are over. And even people who start to like, really focus on their menstrual cycle, there might be a lot of grief that there aren't very many cycles left, right? And this idea that like it's sort of over. And one of the books had such a beautiful description that they were like, our menstrual cycle throughout the whole of our lives is kind of like the training wheels. So like if you have this ability to literally create human life within you, then training wheels are really essential to show you like, okay, how do you maintain a balance? How do you maintain relaxation and rest? How do you maintain outward expression? How do you, like, so each part of the cycle is sort of showing us how to do that. And then menopause is when we take the training wheels off. So it's not an ending. It's like the training wheels are off. You are now able to hold all of that without training wheels. And so I just like love the reframing of like, this is now the time that you sort of have your unbridled power. Like, and there's a reason why so many like heroines' journey stories are that, right? Are like someone who is in their feminine, like finding the full power without any, training wheels, without any restrictions, without any, outside control. And so I think that that's like a beautiful way to look at like now we're moving into this phase of like power creation, authenticity, and expression that is no longer being held, protected or softened. And so for anyone who is still perhaps having a menstrual cycle, or anyone who wants to sort of delve into this realm of like the esoteric parts of this, or like how the cycle and power and creativity and all that kind of stuff, Flow is a really amazing book. So FLO, that's Alyssa Vitti. So that's a really nice, just like basics one. If you're kind of like, I like things to be kind of logical and I like the basics. If you want to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole, there is Wild Power or Wild Feminine. So both of those are incredible books about just like exploring the cycle, exploring like touching base with the body. Like if you want to think about practices, Wild Feminine is incredible for the number of practices they list for like how to be in touch with your own body, how to be in touch with the ovaries, the uterus, the vagina, like how to really start to sense in to like what are the stories there and what needs to be healed or what is the guidance there. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, then I recommend Womb Awakening. That one's very woo. That one like really takes it down the rabbit hole, and it's really amazing. But it's great. Come as You Are is also an incredible book about sexuality and how it might be different for some people in female bodies. So Come as You Are is a really good one. I do like Mindy Pelz's work as well, Pelz. She talks like almost excessive, like so excessively about weight loss, though. It's really like it really frustrates me because I think she's just doing it to like sell, which really frustrates me. But the rest of her content is sort of worth moving through that, maybe. But some of it is kind of amazing. And Madeline from last night, her cookbook, incredible. Her cookbook is amazing. Like I literally keep it at my clinic so I can show patients. But it is actually like an incredible book for like really looking at the cycle and where you are and how you might like engage with nutrition in this very different way. So those are my book recommendations because I'm a giant book nerd. And if anyone does have any other questions, you are certainly welcome to jump in. But that was what I had.
And I wanted to say that because I read the Galveston diet. I did a book study on that in the summer. And I felt the same way because reading the book, she is not talking about weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
The word diet in the title, I think, because so many women would be like, I need to lose weight, I'll buy this book.
Yeah, it sells,
The
unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
marketing effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, oh, this is really about healthy lifestyle and good recommendations to help you in peri and menopause to feel your best. And it's not about starving yourself at all. So it doesn't have that diet culture in it.
Good.
But okay, so we are just about out of time, and I'm going to make sure that we land at the 1 hour because I know everybody has their time budgeted. And we just want to thank you so much for coming today, Erin.
My pleasure.
My little co-anchor. And oh, Erica,
You're
same thing.
so welcome, Erica. Thank you so much for your comment.
Coming and asking. It was a quiet class, but I think that it's partially because the nature of so much personal responsibility, right? And no emphasis on symptoms kind of can leave women feeling like, well, I don't really know how to do that. I don't really know
Mhm.
where am I at if I'm not focused on the things that are going wrong because that's what I've been
Mm.
focusing on. But this is just an invitation and an introduction to this idea that will take you to a much more powerful and hopeful place in your life going through perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Aw.
I'm going to hit the stop recording so that we are